So today, after much speculation and rumors had been swirling around, it was officially announced that a trade had in fact taken place between Team Liquid and CLG. jdm64, who had been opting for Team CLG for quite some time, will now be moving over to Liquid, and Koosta, the opper formerly of Enemy and Selfless, that had been opting for Liquid for the past few months, is now going to be moving over to CLG. So I just want to take a look at both these players and take a look at this move and just kind of make heads or tails of it. So to start things off, let's take a look at jdm64. So this is a guy who made a huge name for himself throughout, I would say, the last 6 months or so of 2015 while playing with CLG. He really started to pick things up around the time of ESWC 2015, which was in July of 2015. We actually saw him having some pretty good games against teams like Renegades and Envious on some particular maps at that tournament, though CLG didn't really progress very far there. Then moving on into August of that year, we saw him playing at jdm64, where again he was able to put up some pretty impressive numbers against teams like Envious and SK. And SK, that's much different than the one that we see today, featuring players I believe like Cadian and Sandin and Barry and different guys that are not affiliated with SK anymore. And of course, this was back before Envious had made some moves back whenever they played him at ESWC in comparison to what we saw at jdm64. But still, these were pretty solid teams from the European scene that he was able to have pretty good individual numbers against. He also had a pretty good map against the TSM lineup that was there at IEM's Gamescom, and one of the two maps he played against that team, which of course now most of those players make up what is currently Astralis. He then played his first major with CLG back at ESL1 Cologne later that month in August, where he helped his team defeat eBettle to make it to the group decider, where they played against Navi on a Cobblestone game where they almost made it to the top 8 over Navi. It was a 16-14 game on Cobblestone, a very close game, and JDM put up 32 kills against Navi, going toe-to-toe with one of the most elite oppers, and many people regarded the best opper in the world, which is Guardian. And he went head-to-head against this guy and put up great numbers. I think this is where he really started to catch people's attention, that he was a capable opper back whenever he played in this ESL1 Cologne tournament. He followed it up later that month when he helped his team qualify for Cluj-Napoca, the next major, where he was just absolutely wrecking CSGO Lounge and Flipside Tactics. Yes, not, elite-level European teams, but still pretty decent ones, and he was just absolutely crushing them, made it look easy playing against these guys. And then whenever he went into Cluj-Napoca in October to play his next major with CLG, he again was playing really good Counter-Strike. We saw some close map losses to Navi in the opening group game, where again he was putting up great numbers, and then he helped his team beat Dignitas on Cobble, which of course this is a lot different Dignitas than what you see today. MSL of course was still the in-game leader at that time. This is back when they had Pimp and Kierby on board, and I think they even had AZ still at this point. So much different Dignitas, but still they were considered a pretty good team at the time, and he actually helped his team beat Dignitas, putting up some impressive numbers. And then they played a best-of-3 decider against Navi, where they actually managed to take a map off of Navi on Cobblestone this time, but then lost the other two maps. But again, JDM looked really sharp in this series, again proving that he could keep up with the best opera in the world at the time, which was Guardian. Now, to end the year 2015, he did have a little bit of struggle at the ESL Season 2 finals, but he did actually have this one really impressive game against Luminosity on Overpass where he dropped 31 kills. And so he was still, again, showing these hints of brilliance that, when he had an op in his hands, he could have a substantial impact in a positive way for his team. And then whenever he competed with CLG at the last major they will have attended together, with JDM a part of CLG Columbus, for MLG, he was able to lead his team to a top 8 finish at that tournament by beating teams in the group play such as Envy and Gambit, where he was individually performing very well. And though his team did eventually lose to Team Liquid in the quarterfinals, he still put up some pretty good numbers throughout those two games, I thought. Now, in most recent times, we did see him playing with CLG during the first week of E-League, and he also played a couple of other events where he didn't look as good, but I would say that he still has been having more good maps than bad, even at E-League, where he really struggled in the opening day when he was playing against teams like SK and Astralis. When you look at the next 2 days to help get CLG into the weekly finals on that Friday night against Astralis on TBS, he really started to pick up the pace, and he was having those high impact kills even if his overall numbers weren't that great. And I think he still wound up, if you take out the first day and you just look at days 2, 3, and 4 of that week, he had more good maps than bad. I think he had like 2 really bad maps the last 3 days of the week compared to maybe like 5 or so pretty good maps. So the point is I believe that JDM64 has firmly established himself as one of the best operators in the North American region. And in fact, you could argue that he's the best operator in the North American region. This was especially the case when Skadoodle seemed to be suffering from quite a slump when you look at how things were kind of going for him in the early parts of 2016 and like the tail end of 2015. I think Skadoodle's really started to pick up the pace when you look at things like E-League and you even look at the Cologne qualifiers 2016 and the online play recently from Cloud9. I feel like he is picking it back up, so maybe Skadoodle is going to take the title as the best operator in North America once more. But even if that's the case, JDM is still firmly number 2 in my opinion. And again, he has proven the ability to compete against top international teams and be able to put up numbers. Even in games where his team is struggling or perhaps losing, he still seems to be a guy that's able to, put up the numbers that are needed to at least keep his team in the game or give his team a chance to find a way back in. He really has been the star of CLG. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Sure, people look at Tarek as being like this rifler that has huge potential and at times can be a star player, but it really has been JDM64 who is the main tool that CLG had to get things going for themselves. And so, again, a great player. The only criticisms that he's ever really received is that he maybe isn't as good with a rifle. A lot of people say that he can't really put up numbers on the board with an AK or an M4. Some of this I do wonder if he just refuses to try, because I've seen so many situations where it would have made sense for him to probably purchase an M4 or an AK to make things better for his team economically. Or maybe he was in a situation where there was literally a rifle on the ground that he could have picked up, but for whatever reason he decided to stick with the Scout or an SMG or whatever it is. So maybe it's just a lack of confidence. From what Hayes told me when I did an interview with him a long time ago, he mentioned that JDM actually puts in a ton of hours DMing with AKs and M4s, and that many people on the CLG team had confidence that JDM could be able to still do okay with the rifle, but for whatever reason, he felt like he could do so much more with an op in his hands that he never really wanted to touch a rifle if it was possible to avoid it, which makes sense. You want to use your main gun so that you can, have the maximum yield, that you put yourself in an optimal position to perform. But I do almost wonder how much he gets in his own head, and just the fact that because he just doesn't drill using a rifle in real situations. Maybe he DMs with it, but if he's not trying to use it in official matches, it's a different situation to be in. And so I do wonder if maybe he could actually work on that if he so chose to. But if he decides to stick with the style that he is, where he's just super op heavy and just relies on that all the time, that's still not that bad considering the amount of work he's been able to do throughout his career by playing that way, by just focusing on opping. He still puts up fantastic numbers and usually has great games in almost all the ones that he participates in. And so when you look at all of this, you have to feel like this is a great grab for Team Liquid. Of any of the operas you could have tried to collect in the North American region, there was really 2 that come to mind. That's Skadoodle and JDM. If you get one of those 2 guys, you're setting yourselves up very well to have a very experienced opera who can perform under pressure and who can compete against the best in the world. And so Liquid are able to get JDM, and I think this is a fantastic move. I think this really does help the stock of their roster. I think JDM's a great player, even if maybe he started to drop off a little bit with CLG, his last few events with them. I don't suspect that that'll stick. Maybe, there was a lot of issues going on internally there. So I think, you bring over to Team Liquid. They obviously are kind of up in the air themselves, but maybe this is the beginning stages of them finally stabilizing, finally getting everything together that they want and setting up a system around it and actually keeping this team, hopefully, for the long term and actually building something with it. And so, yeah, I can't really argue against this move. There's not too many shortcomings from it. I really do feel like JDM is one of the best in the business for his position, and I think he'll do Liquid well. So I think this was a very smart play by the folks over there at Team Liquid, and I'll just leave it at that. So the next part of this trade is obviously the fact that Koosta, who had been opping for Team Liquid, is now going to be moving over to CLG. Now, of course, Koosta was known as the star player of Enemy, which became Selfless, and he looked great for them in all their online games for the most part, even against some of the best teams in the North American region when they were playing in the ESL Pro League or CEVO or what have you. He seemed to be able to perform, against the best teams within his region, and he even was able to do pretty well on LAN. I mean, he played against some pretty decent teams at the Americas Minor from the North American region. Granted, wasn't like the best competition of NA, but there were some pretty decent teams there that he had to play against, and he put up really good numbers. I mean, he was just blitzing through kind of the mid-tier of the NA scene while he was playing there. Then he played at the RGM Pro Series, where he, went up against some top North American teams and Renegades, and he put up good numbers there as well. So while it was lower competition in comparison to what a JDM has been up against, where he's playing against the best teams in the world, Koosta's origins really did lie in the fact that he was dominating the level of play that he was within, and so it made sense that he should maybe take the next step forward, step up to a higher level of competition and see how he could actually perform at a higher level. And so he does join this Team Liquid team, and his first LAN with them was, in fact, at DreamHack Malmö, where they were playing with Simple on the team at this period in time. And he only opted one of the two maps they played at this tournament. He opted against Mouse Sports on Dust 2, I believe it was. So I think they lost 13-16 or something like that. And I think Koosta went 17-17. He went neutral. I promise I don't have these numbers written down, by the way, so if I'm right, I don't know how I remember these numbers, but he actually had a pretty decent map there. Yeah, he wasn't super flashy. Yeah, he wasn't having this crazy impact, but for the most part, I felt like he was doing his job. He was hitting the easier shots you're supposed to hit, and he certainly wasn't the reason they lost that map entirely. I mean, I think maybe he gets a bit scapegoated there. Now, of course, he played against Tyloo on Cobblestone that went into like double overtime or something, where they actually lost. And in that map, he actually didn't op. It was actually Simple who took over opping during that map. And Koosta got forced position he never really played, a role that he wasn't familiar with, that he hadn't practiced at all. And while sure, people may say that, hey, you need to be flexible, you need to be versatile, you need to be able to use a rifle, all of this business, it's so different to just be, practicing one particular thing, all these particular spots and positions on all these different maps, and then all of a sudden, when it's game time, you get completely slotted into a new role. And of course it's going to be uncomfortable. It's not something you're used to. Yeah, you should be flexible, but at the same time, if you've been drilling a particular thing for weeks on end, and then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, it switches up, you can't really expect the transition to be smooth, especially when it's that rapid. And so it didn't go well for him, that map. He did really poorly, and Liquid wound up losing the map, and they bomb out of the groups 0-2 at that particular tournament. And then we see them move on to DreamHack Austin. This is where we see, of course, Adren incorporated back into the team at this point. And I would say that in the early stages of this tournament, he was playing against his former team Selfless. He's putting up great numbers there. That's great. But when he got against the higher level of competition, like when he was playing against Luminosity in the semifinals, again, he wasn't able to do a whole heck of a lot. So he was really struggling to make that adjustment to still be able to perform well when the level of competition increases. And then we saw him play at the ESL Season 3 finals shortly after that, where actually I thought he did pretty well at this particular tournament. So we're now 3 LANs into his time with Liquid. The first 2 didn't go so well, though I would argue that DreamHack Malmö wasn't even really a fair shot, but he did get a fair shot at DreamHack Austin. That didn't go so well. But now he gets another fair shot at the ESL Season 3 finals. And here I thought he actually did pretty well. He had some pretty good maps against NIP and Cloud9, and against Fnatic, in that best of 3 where they got 0-2'd. He did do pretty poorly in one map, but one of the maps he actually did pretty okay. I think he went like 22-20. I can't remember what map this was. But he in fact did pretty well at least one map against Fnatic. Certainly it's not the full force Fnatic in this particular situation. It was back when they were using Vinton in place of Olafmeister, but they were still, one of the best teams in the world, and he did put a decent map against them out of one of the 2. And like I said, he looked pretty good earlier in that tournament against C9 and NIP. And in fact, if he wouldn't have gotten blasted in one of the 2 maps he played against Fnatic, he would have ended the event positive. I think he ended the event like -5, -4, like a small negative amount, but it's only because he just got wrecked one particular map against Fnatic where he went like negative double digits. I don't even know what it was, but that kind of ruined, I guess, his rating for the overall event. But the other maps, I thought he actually did quite well. So this is actually a good showing for Koosta, in my opinion. Maybe signs of an upswing. But then we saw the team just absolutely collapse during the first week of E-League, where they went 0-8, unable to score any maps against the competition there, which was Renegades, Cloud9, and Luminosity. And then out of the 8 maps that they played, I feel like Koosta had 3 good maps out of 8, maybe 4. But the other 4 or 5 maps, he really did perform poorly. But at the same time, is it because he individually was just bad and he's not ready for the high-level competition, like he just was a poor player? Or is it the fact that the entire team's collapsing around him, his entire process in the team, And so it's the complete team failed. It's not as if anyone was carrying them or something like that. I mean, there were moments in which, yes, certain players had really good mats. Like I said, Koosta had 3 of them. There were other mats where other players had good performances, but then they would fall off another mat. So it seemed like a huge mixed bag, a lot of hit or miss from the whole team, really. And then there was just overall some big problems to be addressed as well. So has he been scapegoated a bit? I think he has been a bit, but it is also true that he hasn't really quite lived up to the hype in many of these maps I've seen him play in. So what can he do on CLG would be the next big question, and I think that only is going to be determined via figuring out what CLG is even going to be going forward, because I'm not sure there's going to be more roster changes to the horizon. We've always heard these rumors about Tarek potentially going to other teams, so is he actually going to stick around, or is he going to be looking for a way out with JDM departing? You know, what are they going to be able to put around Koosta? Because that's the problem. There's so many inconsistencies within the whole NA talent pool, really. I almost want to just do a whole video on that, but when you look at CLG, they don't really seem to have a stable rock player on that team. Like Cutler used to be, but lately he hasn't played as well. Tarek had a brief period in time in 2016 throughout the beginning of the year where he looked pretty good, but he seemed pretty hit or miss at E-League in my opinion, and he was hit or miss a lot of 2015 as well when he had to play up against the top level competition. So it seems like there's a lot of consistency issues over there, and then you're going to put Koosta into that system, and he's still trying to develop and adjust to playing against elite level competition. So I feel like there's a lot of question marks with him joining CLG, but maybe it's a better environment for him. I don't know. Maybe if some of the other guys can step up, maybe there won't be as much pressure on him. But you felt like Liquid was a perfect scenario where he shouldn't have had too much pressure because there were a lot of star players around him who were seen as being some of the best in NA, and that system still didn't work out at the end of the day. But again, I don't know how chaotic this whole situation was and how that affected him. So I'm not ready to give up on Koosta yet, I guess is the point. But I'm not sure if this CLG trade is in fact going to be the move that finally gets him to where he needs to be to kind of establish himself as being one of the better operators in the scene. Maybe that'll never happen. Who knows? But we'll just have to see, because right now I feel like there's so many question marks surrounding CLG. There's still a lot of question marks surrounding Liquid, by the way. When I talked about JD moving to the team, I think that's a great move. But I actually did a video about Team Liquid, I would say maybe just a week before I'm doing this one, where in the last 6 minutes of that video, I addressed a lot of problems that Team Liquid still needed to sort out, even with a big player trade, to be able to be successful. And this included the mentality of closing games, Nitro needing to figure out his place on the team again, because it seems like he's jumping around all over the place. He had a great in 2015 when he was entry fragging, but now we see him secondary opping again. We don't see him performing as well anymore, even though he's still kind of in the same T-side role. So what's going on with him? He needs to get his stuff sorted out, because while Elige is starting to grow, it seems like Nitro's starting to fade. So that, along with mentality of closing games, as well as some other issues going on, there's still a lot of things that Liquid need to work on outside of just picking up JDM if they really want to take the next steps towards being contenders again in the international scene. And I think I'll just leave the video there at this point. Maybe I'll make another video down the road, because there's this rumor that Pimp is going to be joining Liquid. There's reports out there about it already, and those reports seem pretty firm. They seem like, it is pretty much a done deal, but I'll wait for an official announcement before I talk about Pimp joining Liquid, if that in fact does go through. But yeah, if you enjoyed this content, please follow and subscribe for more. And again, please check out that other video I just did on Liquid about a week ago, where I go into more detail about some of the issues on that team if you want to learn more about Liquid and what it's going to be like for them going forward. So other than that, without further ado, catch you next time.